You've probably heard the California real estate pitch your whole life, that prices always come back, demand never disappears, and the best neighborhoods stay strong no matter what the headlines say. As we move into 2026, that story is starting to show stress, not in luxury enclaves or postcard zip codes, but in the suburbs that powered the last housing boom. These are the areas that surged during the cheap money era, when remote work felt permanent and bidding wars pushed prices beyond what local incomes could reasonably support. Mortgage rates remain in the low 6% range, while millions of homeowners are still locked into loans closer to 3%. That divide has quietly frozen move-up buyers and reduced overall demand without triggering a dramatic collapse. Homes are no longer selling in a single weekend. Listings are sitting longer, buyers are slower and more selective, sellers are adjusting expectations. The monthly payment has become the deciding factor, not the list price, not peak-era comparable sales. Rising insurance costs, property taxes, and recurring fees now matter far more than they did during the low-rate years. In this video, we break down the top 5 California suburbs most exposed to a housing correction in 2026. We focus on financing-dependent markets and areas where demand softens before prices make headlines. If you are buying, selling, or relocating this year, this breakdown helps you see pressure building early, because in California, corrections rarely begin with panic. They begin with hesitation, longer days on market, and negotiated adjustments that quietly reset expectations. Number 5. Chula Vista has long been treated as the practical doorway into San Diego County home ownership. It offered more square footage than many coastal neighborhoods while still feeling reachable for households with solid incomes. For years, that positioning created steady demand without requiring the buyer to be ultra wealthy. The market could lean on finance buyers because the monthly payment stayed within a tolerable range. That tolerance is the first thing higher mortgage rates destroy. As of January 2026, 30-year mortgage rates are hovering around the low 6% range, and that changes the entire buyer pool. A home does not become too expensive in a philosophical way. It becomes too expensive in the most ordinary way possible, because the payment no longer fits inside a household budget. In January 2026, the median sale price in Chula Vista is approximately $827,500. At that price point, the difference between low rates and today's rates is not a minor inconvenience. It is a qualification filter that removes entire categories of buyers before they even schedule a showing. A finance market can stay strong while confidence is high and approvals are easy. A finance market becomes fragile when approvals get tight and buyers start failing the math. This is where Chula Vista begins to look exposed. The risk is not that everyone suddenly hates the city. The risk is that fewer buyers can clear the monthly hurdle. Lenders evaluate debt-to-income ratios with less flexibility when rates are higher. A household that could qualify comfortably in a low-rate era may now qualify only for less house. Some households do not qualify at all. Even if their income has not changed. That is how demand can weaken without any dramatic news event. Chula Vista also carries layered ownership costs that buyers cannot ignore once the payment is already heavy. Property taxes raise the baseline monthly obligation. Homeowners insurance adds another recurring bill that buyers must budget for from day one. In California, insurance costs have become more visible and more difficult to treat as a stable assumption. Buyers do not need a statewide crisis to feel it. They only need one unpleasant quote during escrow to understand that the all-in number is different from the listing price. Chula Vista also includes many HOA governed communities. HOA dues behave like a permanent monthly add-on, and they compress affordability further. When the buyer stacks mortgage, taxes, insurance, and HOA together, the payment stops feeling like a purchase decision. It starts feeling like a long-term lifestyle obligation. In January 2026, Chula Vista prices are modestly lower year over year. That is not a crash headline, and it does not need to be. Small declines at high price levels often signal that momentum has lost certainty. Median days on market remain under 40 days, so transactions still happen. Speed alone does not eliminate vulnerability when the buyer pool is narrowing. A market can still move while also becoming more sensitive to shocks. The earliest signs usually show up in negotiation behavior, not in a dramatic chart. buyers take longer to decide. Buyers compare more listings before committing. Buyers ask for credits, repairs, and concessions more routinely. Once concessions become normal, once seller leverage changes without anyone announcing it, sellers who need to move must choose between waiting and adjusting their terms. Adjustments influence comparable sales, and comparable sales influence appraisal outcomes. Appraisals influence how high the next buyer can finance, which feeds back into pricing power. That sequence is slow, technical, and incredibly effective at lowering expectations. Chula Vista ranks 5th because it sits near a critical affordability boundary for many financed households trying to stay in San Diego County. When mortgage rates remain elevated, that boundary tightens and the buyer pool becomes smaller and more selective. A smaller buyer pool does not create chaos. It creates measurable pressure, one negotiated sale at a time. And in 2026, that is exactly how a correction tends to start. On number 4, Irvine has long been regarded as one of the most stable suburban markets in California. It carries a reputation built on top-ranked schools, planned communities, and proximity to major employment centers in Orange County. For many buyers, purchasing in Irvine has historically felt like a defensive move rather than a speculative one. The assumption was simple: demand here would remain durable regardless of broader market cycles. That assumption becomes harder to maintain in a higher rate environment. As of January 2026, the median sale price in Irvine stands at approximately $1,420,000. At mortgage rates hovering around 6%, that price level creates a substantial monthly payment even with a strong down payment. When prices exceed $1 million, small changes in interest rates produce large differences in monthly obligations. The affordability threshold rises sharply as a result. In January 2026, prices in Irvine are down roughly 10% year over year. Median days on market have extended into the mid 80-day range. Longer listing times signal that buyers are taking more time before committing. The shift in pace reflects caution rather than panic. Irvine is not insulated from financing constraints simply because of its brand strength. Most transactions still depend on conventional mortgage approval. Higher borrowing costs increase required income levels for qualification. Even well-compensated households must reassess budget flexibility at this price tier. Lenders evaluate debt-to-income ratios carefully when loan amounts are large. And that evaluation becomes stricter when rates remain elevated for an extended period. Beyond the mortgage itself, ownership costs in Irvine include additional recurring expenses. Many communities operate under homeowners associations with monthly dues. Those dues are fixed obligations layered on top of the mortgage payment. Property taxes in higher value markets also raise the baseline carrying cost. Insurance premiums add another monthly component that cannot be ignored. When buyers calculate the full payment stack, affordability margins narrow quickly. A narrower margin reduces the number of households who can comfortably qualify. When the qualified buyer pool contracts, transaction volume becomes more sensitive to economic shifts. In this environment, negotiation patterns begin to change. Buyers request concessions more frequently. Rate buy-down credits become part of standard discussions. Inspection contingencies are exercised with greater scrutiny. Sellers must respond strategically if they want to maintain momentum. Comparable sales begin reflecting negotiated outcomes rather than peak pricing. Appraisals then adjust to those comparables, influencing subsequent listings. This feedback loop does not require a dramatic collapse to operate. It simply requires sustained pressure on affordability. Irvine's high price point amplifies the impact of elevated mortgage rates. The higher the entry cost, the more sensitive the market becomes to financing conditions. In markets priced near the top of income tolerance, elasticity is limited. When borrowing costs remain near 6%, elasticity tightens further. But Irvine ranks 4th because its premium pricing structure magnifies every shift in rate and qualification standards. In 2026, that amplification effect increases the probability of gradual price pressure if elevated borrowing costs persist. Number 3, Brentwood has often been marketed as the space for distance trade that still keeps you connected to the Bay Area economy. It offered newer subdivisions, larger homes, and a suburban lifestyle that felt attainable compared to inner Bay Area pricing. For years, buyers accepted the commute in exchange for square footage and relative affordability. That trade made sense when financing costs were low and confidence was high. In January 2026, the median sale price in Brentwood is approximately $792,500. Prices are down roughly 5.7% year over year. Median days on market have expanded to around 76 days, more than double the pace seen a year earlier. That increase in listing time is not a minor adjustment. It signals that buyers are taking longer to commit. When homes sit longer in a commuter-dependent suburb, leverage begins to shift. Brentwood relies heavily on financed households rather than deep cash buyers. At mortgage rates near 6%, the monthly payment on a high six-figure home rises significantly. Higher payments narrow the group of households who qualify comfortably. Qualification thresholds become more decisive in this price range. Some buyers must reduce their target price. Others pause entirely and wait for more favorable conditions. The commute factor adds another structural layer of vulnerability. Longer distances to core job centers translate into recurring transportation costs. Fuel expenses, vehicle wear, and time commitments function as hidden ownership costs. When office attendance increases, even slightly, that hidden cost becomes more visible. Buyers who once viewed the commute as manageable may reassess its long-term sustainability. That reassessment reduces urgency. Reduced urgency slows transaction velocity. Slower velocity weakens pricing power. Brentwood also features many homes built within similar development cycles. When inventory rises, comparable properties compete directly on price and concessions. In a hot market, similarity does not matter. In a cooling market, similarity intensifies competition. The most motivated seller often sets the new benchmark. That benchmark becomes the next comparable sale. Comparable sales guide, appraisal values. Appraisal limits influence how much future buyers can finance. This chain reaction does not require panic to operate. It only requires sustained higher borrowing costs and reduced buyer urgency. Brentwood's year-over-year price decline combined with extended listing times suggests that adjustment is already underway. The market is not collapsing, but it is recalibrating. Recalibration is often the early phase of correction in commuter-oriented suburbs. As financing conditions remain restrictive, elasticity in demand tightens further. When elasticity tightens, small shocks produce larger pricing responses. Brentwood ranks third because its affordability depends on both mortgage conditions and commute tolerance. Two variables that are less forgiving in 2026 than they were during the low rate cycle. That combination increases its exposure to continued price pressure if elevated borrowing costs persist. Number 2, Santa Clarita. Santa Clarita has long marketed itself as the organized alternative to Los Angeles congestion. It offered larger homes, planned neighborhoods, and a quieter environment within driving distance of major job centers. For years, that formula attracted families willing to trade commute time for space and perceived value. The trade functioned smoothly when mortgage rates were historically low. Low borrowing costs kept monthly payments manageable even as home prices climbed. That cushion has largely disappeared in 2026. As of January 2026, the median sale price in Santa Clarita sits near $759,000. Its prices are modestly lower year over year, signaling that upward momentum has stalled. Median days on market have expanded into the mid-70-day range, noticeably longer than the prior year. Longer listing times indicate reduced urgency among buyers. Reduced urgency is often the first measurable shift in a financing-driven suburb. Santa Clarita depends heavily on conventional mortgage approvals rather than large volumes of cash buyers. At mortgage rates hovering near 6%, the monthly payment on a home in the mid to high six figures rises sharply. That increase alters qualification outcomes for a meaningful portion of the buyer pool. Lenders assess debt-to-income ratios carefully when borrowing costs are elevated. Households that once qualified comfortably may now qualify for less house or fail to qualify altogether. Marginal buyers tend to exit the market quietly. When marginal buyers disappear, transaction velocity slows. Slower velocity weakens seller leverage. Seller leverage is especially sensitive in commuter-oriented suburbs. Santa Clarita's geographic position requires daily or weekly travel to employment centers. Transportation costs operate as an indirect addition to housing expenses. Fuel, vehicle depreciation, and time commitments effectively increase the total cost of ownership. When in-office expectations rise, even incrementally, that added burden becomes more visible. Buyers begin recalculating whether the commute remains sustainable over multiple years. Recalculation introduces hesitation into purchasing decisions. Hesitation lengthens listing durations. Extended durations create pressure for price adjustments or concessions. Concessions become reflected in closing data. Closing data influences comparable sales in surrounding neighborhoods. Comparable sales shape appraisal outcomes for future buyers. Appraisal constraints limit financing capacity on subsequent transactions. That sequence creates a reinforcing cycle of moderated pricing. The process unfolds gradually rather than dramatically. It does not require require widespread distress or forced selling. It only requires sustained affordability compression. Santa Clarita's historical advantage over central Los Angeles narrows when financing costs remain elevated. The perception of value weakens when the monthly payment absorbs a larger share of household income. In higher rate environments, suburban markets built on commuter trade-offs often feel elasticity first. Elasticity declines as buyers become more selective and financially cautious. Selectivity reduces transaction volume relative to available inventory. When volume becomes fragile, markets become more sensitive to broader economic shifts. Santa Clarita ranks second because its pricing structure, financing dependence, and commuter dynamics amplify the impact of sustained higher borrowing costs. In 2026, that amplification increases the probability of continued gradual price pressure if rates remain near current levels. Number 1. Temecula. Temecula has been marketed for years as the Southern California escape that still feels aspirational. It offers master-planned communities, newer construction, and a lifestyle that appears more spacious and relaxed than core urban counties. During the low-rate era, Temecula represented a convincing value proposition. Buyers could secure a large home while keeping the monthly payment within reach. That affordability cushion was heavily dependent on cheap financing. In January 2026, the median sale price in Temecula stands at approximately $725,000. Prices are modestly lower year over year, indicating that upward momentum has weakened. Median days on market have expanded into the mid-60-day range, noticeably higher than the prior year. Longer listing times reflect reduced urgency among qualified buyers. Temecula is not a cash-dominated luxury enclave. It relies primarily on financed households using conventional mortgage products, at mortgage rates hovering near 6%. The monthly payment on a mid-$700,000 property increases significantly compared to the ultra-low rate period. That increase narrows the pool of buyers who can qualify comfortably. Lenders apply stricter debt-to-income standards when loan amounts are large and rates remain elevated. Households near qualification limits are the first to exit the market. As marginal buyers withdraw, transaction velocity slows. Slower velocity weakens pricing leverage for sellers. Temecula's geographic distance from major employment centers compounds the issue. Long commutes create recurring transportation expenses that function as indirect housing costs. Fuel, vehicle maintenance, and time commitments reduce disposable income. When office attendance expectations rise, even incrementally, those costs become more burdensome. And buyers must evaluate not only the mortgage payment, but the full lifestyle expense attached to the location. That evaluation often leads to more conservative purchasing decisions. Temecula also features many neighborhoods built within similar development cycles. Similar floor plans and comparable lot sizes increase competition when inventory rises. In a slower market, comparable homes compete primarily on price and concessions. The most motivated seller often establishes the new benchmark. That benchmark influences comparable sales across the community. Comparable sales guide appraisal outcomes. Appraisals determine how much future buyers can finance. When appraisals trend lower, pricing power diminishes further. This adjustment cycle does not require widespread financial distress. It requires sustained affordability compression and reduced buyer urgency. Temecula's appeal has historically been tied to the perception of value relative to coastal counties. When borrowing costs remain elevated, that perception becomes harder to justify in monthly terms. Exurban markets often experience elasticity first because they depend on buyers willing to stretch. When stretching becomes uncomfortable, demand contracts quickly. Contracting demand increases sensitivity to broader economic uncertainty. Temecula ranks first because it combines financing dependence, distance-based cost structure, and inventory similarity within a higher rate environment. That combination creates amplified exposure to gradual but measurable price pressure in 2026 if borrowing costs remain near current levels. California's housing market in 2026 is not defined by dramatic headlines, but by disciplined math. Across the top 5 suburbs we covered, the common thread is not desirability, but payment sensitivity. With mortgage rates hovering near 6%, the monthly obligation has become the ultimate filter separating qualified buyers from hopeful ones. In Temecula, Santa Clarita, Brentwood, Irvine, and Chula Vista, affordability margins are tightening as borrowing costs, insurance expenses, and total ownership calculations converge. Homes are still selling, but they are taking longer, and negotiation leverage is shifting toward buyers who remain financially secure. Corrections in California rarely begin with panic. They begin with extended days on market and steady price adjustments. If you are buying, let's focus on whether the payment works long term, not just today. If you are selling, understand that pricing discipline matters more than peak cycle expectations. The monthly payment now defines the market's direction.